infrastructure that we've inherited from a single country. We have common transport and energy infrastructure. We have a very high level of cooperation between our enterprises. And we've achieved a lot in the area of science and education, and we could use all that in order to be successful in the world markets and to increase the welfare of our citizens. I'd like to draw your attention to this fact. In the forthcoming days, we are going to sign the Treaty on the Establishment of the Eurasian Economic Union. Please have a look at the document. Just have a look at the document as experts. Try to be unbiased. Try to analyze the text of the document. Try to analyze what there is in the document, what could be aimed at restoring the empire. Nothing. All the provisions in the treaty are only aimed at strengthening the cooperation in economy. What we are trying to do is to profit from the heritage of the previous generations in order to be more competitive and more successful in addressing the crucial issues. And, of course, we are going to continue to do that. And the fact that the Brussels democracy is unwilling to maintain the relations with the Eurasian Economic Union and with the Customs Union is astonishing. I suppose I'm not going to reveal any secret if I say that the leaders in Brussels are always trying to refer some procedural documents and explain that they're not going to negotiate with the Eurasian Economic Union or the Customs Union because the Belarus and Kazakhstan are not yet members to the WTO. But they may always keep them beyond the WTO. I suppose they even do that deliberately. My perception is that in Brussels, in the European Commission, they probably believe that these integration processes could threat their own competitiveness. But I suppose it is a mistake. Their approach should be based not on potential threats, but on the advantages. I suppose that there are some obvious advantages that could be in the cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union. Let me explain why. I suppose that there are more advantages than threats here. Eurasian Economic Union is based on the WTO principles. And it will just make the work of our European countries with Belarus and Kazakhstan even easier, and they will have access to the market that is more than 170 billion people. It is a very big market from the point of view of consumption, and the access to this market will also allow them to solve the energy problems, because Kazakhstan is also an oil and gas producing country. Belarus can also play a big role in those processes, given its geographical location in the very center of Europe, and it was called the main plant of the USSR. We could probably leave the truisms and try to divide politics from economy. Our colleague from Japan, information agency Kyodo News. Hiroki Sugita, please, the floor is yours.
ロシアと日本との関係に絞ってお話を伺います。先の上海の訪問で、大統領はロシアと中国がですね、戦略的協調関係の新しい段階に達したというふうにおっしゃいました。
You said that Russia and China have it.
Премьер-министр Японии господин Абе хотел бы поднять отношения с Россией тоже на новый уровень стратегического партнерства. Как вы...
Russia as well.
どのような内容であるべきだと思っていらっしゃいますか。
What is your
また大
vision
統領はですね、安倍首相との間で、
of your possible strategic partnership with Japan?
これはウクライナ情勢の前なんですけれども、
I heard
現
that
在もその
the president was going to visit Japan in the near future.
話は変わりないと思いますが、
However,
いつ訪日されてですね、そしてどんな
I do not think that
達成したい
something is going to change after the visit,
大統領は
but what do you think could be discussed during the visit?
という言葉を使っ
And
て
also, I'd like to raise the issue of the four northern islands. You mentioned that you'd like to use the Hikiwake tool so that no one was the winner or the loser in that situation. So could you please comment on the Hikiwake situation?
Мы уже говорили, и я, и председатель Конгресса Си Цзиньпинь,
I already said
мы не дружим
myself,
между собой против кого-то.
Chairman Xi Jinping,
У
we're
нас
not
свои
friends
отношения
against
с Японией,
somebody.
у Китая свои
We have
отношения с
bilateral
Японией.
relations with
Кстати
China.
говоря,
With
наш
Japan, China has
коллега,
bilateral
ваш коллега говорил
relations
о том,
with
что мы
Japan.
должны
Your Chinese
вспомнить о
colleague, by the way, said
70-летии окончания
that
Второй мировой
we
войны.
need to
Это
remember that
касается всех стран, которые
it's been
так или
70
иначе
years
были
since the
вовлечены
World War
в
II
это
ended.
событие.
It's an important
Мы должны вспомнить об
anniversary
этом и
for all
дать объективную
countries that
оценку
were
этой
involved in
трагедии
the
общего
tragic
народа.
events.
Но
So we
сегодня нам
need to
ничего не
look
должно
back and
мешать
cast
двигаться
an
вперед.
objective look at the tragedy.
я
But we're
считаю
past that. Today we need to move forward. We need to leave past behind.
контрпродуктивным,
And I would think
противопоставлять наши
that it would be
отношения с какой бы ни было страной, в том числе и с
counterproductive
Китаем, развитию отношений с третьими.
to say that our relations with any one
У нас
country
нет
should
оснований ограничивать
undermine cooperation
наши
with
связи
any
с
third
Японией.
country. We have no reasons
И
to
я вас
limit
уверяю,
cooperation with Japan, and I can assure
при
you
всех сложностях отношений,
China
сам развивает отношения с Японией. Но у нас
is
просто даже
building
никогда не
bilateral
возникает
cooperation
мысли
with
ни у
Japan.
нас, ни у китайцев
Although
ставить
there are
какие-то
some
условия друг другу
complications,
при
but
развитии отношений
neither
в
us
двустороннем
nor
формате.
Chinese would
Такого никогда не
ever
было и нету.
condition development of our
мы,
bilateral
и
agenda
наши
on
правительства
relations
ведем
with
себя,
third countries. This
исключительно
never happened and never will.
По-партнерски. Мы же не создаем
We
никаких блоков.
cooperate as
Мы
partners.
просто поднимаем
We don't create
на более
blocks.
высокий уровень наших
All we
двусторонних
do
отношений.
is raise our bilateral cooperation to new higher levels. And this is only natural because we supplement each other.
Было бы дополнение наших возможностей с Японией.
And
И когда я
this
говорил
is
о
natural.
нашей готовности обсуждать проблему
is
островов,
Same is true of Japan. Like
напомню,
when
что на каком-то этапе
I spoke about the islands, let me remind you that at a certain stage both Russia and Japan
мы потом
decided to freeze negotiations.
вернулись к ним.
We resumed negotiations. But after the year 1956 declaration that was, by the way, ratified by the Japanese parliament
И Верховным Советом СССР.
and the Supreme Council of the Soviet Union,
Напоминаю, что
so let me remind you that the declaration states in Article 9, if I'm not mistaken, that the Soviet Union is ready to consider handing 2 islands over to Japan. It does not mention terms and conditions, does not mention sovereignty. Which country is going to hold sovereignty over the 2 islands? But it does mention this transfer or handing over. But those 2 islands or the 4 islands are subject to our negotiations. They are difficult. It's a legacy we got from the past. This issue complicates our relations, and both Japan and Russia sincerely seek solution to the issue. Russia sincerely seeks solution. What would Hikiwaki be, the draw be, in this situation? Had I known, we would have signed all papers already. There is no ready-made answer. We will come to a solution, the end of a long process of discussions, but the solution should not undermine interests of either of the parties. It should be an acceptable compromise. That said, neither of the parties should feel it's on the losing side. It's a difficult formula, but if we keep thinking about that, if we keep making small steps towards each other, impossible is nothing. Are we ready to negotiate? Yes, we are. We were surprised to hear recently that Japan decided to join some sanctions. What does that have to do with Japan? I have no clue. And it's suspending negotiations. So we stand ready. Whether Japan is ready, I don't really know. I would ask that question to you. Well, Canadian colleagues, Canadian press, Mr. Cook. The agency was founded in 1917, a memorable year for Russia.
It's a privilege to be here today. I wonder if I could turn your attention to the Arctic for a moment. I think we know that the Arctic may contain perhaps a quarter of the world's undiscovered energy resources, so it's obviously a potential source of significant wealth and probably of strategic military importance as well. Canada's government is laying claim to the North Pole, and our Prime Minister has ordered his own government to craft an international claim for the riches of the ocean floor at the North Pole. Russia, too, has made claims of its own regarding sovereignty of the Arctic seabed, and I believe Russia has even planted a titanium flag on the floor of the ocean. Something that I think prompted fairly strong reaction from other nations. But I'd be very interested to hear your view of Canada's sovereignty claims in the Arctic North. And just one other question, if I may. Our government has also been very critical of you and Russia in its handling of the situation in Crimea. Has described it as aggressive and imperialistic, and I'm curious what your response would be to our Prime Minister's characterization and whether you may intend to have any discussions with him in France during the D-Day celebrations. Thank you.
Well, as regards the meeting, unless anything changes, unless President Holland makes any change, I will come. And I'm not going to be avoiding any of my colleagues, and I would be happy to speak to any Prime Minister of Canada. Is no exception. Sometimes, to be very frank, I'm puzzled and surprised. Take Canadian government criticizing action of Russia. Look where Canada is and where Russia and Ukraine are. I understand. Some people think globally. But in my view, even the US are sort of distant, geographically speaking, from Ukraine. And neither Canada nor US have any substantial interest in Ukraine, not if compared to Russia. I said that before, but let me repeat. I believe that our partners, the United States, European countries, their actions were cumbersome, illegal. They fueled coup d'etat, and as we see, they created threat to fundamental national interests of the Russian Federation, not only economic but security interests as well. Because, and we're well aware that after the coup d'etat, suggestions were made to ban languages of national minorities, and then suggestions were made to join NATO. And logical next step would be deploying of NATO forces and offensive capacities. Had that happened, that would create a new reality for us, and that was the reason why we supported the desire of the people of the Crimea to join Russian Federation. My feeling is that colleagues tried to use language of force when dealing with us, and we had to come up with an adequate response. I hope the situation will never, under no circumstances, repeat anywhere in the globe. And going back to the question from my Spanish colleague, I can repeat, we remain convinced and we think that this is the only correct position. We acted in full compliance with international law. Article 1.2, if I'm not mistaken, of the UN Charter stipulates very clearly that all nations have right to self-determination. And this is exactly the purpose of the United Nations, to uphold these rights. So we oppose the way of thinking where certain international players would twist the norms of international law to justify their actions, their immediate politically motivated actions. Take Kosovo, when they needed to attain their goals and they referred to the right to self-determination, while Crimea is different, and this time they talk about territorial integrity. It is also one of the concepts inscribed in the UN Charter. But let us agree. Do we stick to one principle or do we use double standards? Let us not call white black and vice versa. What we call upon is restore the leading role of international law when it comes to regulating international affairs globally. As regards the position of Canada, it is nothing new. Not much different from the position of the US administration, so it comes as no surprise to us. We're ready to engage in discussions with Prime Minister in particular. We discussed a wide range of topics with him on many occasions. Should there be a need and desire, we remain open and ready. When it comes to the Arctic, there are certain mechanisms under the umbrella of the United Nations. And just recently, through these legal procedures under international law, we got recognition of rights of Russian Federation to certain parts of seabed in the Far East, certain parts of the continental shelf. And we use legal mechanisms. We did that in the Far East, we're doing the same in the Arctic, shall do so in the future. If you noticed, we've been negotiating for a long time with Norwegian friends and partners about shelf delimitation in the Barents Sea. Negotiated for some 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. It's always difficult, especially when it comes to hydrocarbons. We did find a compromise in the end of the day to the benefit of both countries, because as a result we were able to start economic activities in the area, and I think this is the way to go in the Arctic. There are various regional mechanisms. I'm going to employ all the tools to reach understanding. As regards the titanium flag on the seabed, that's not the idea of the authorities. It's rather an emotional reaction. I don't see it's too bad. Back in the days, the Americans landed on the moon and installed their titanium flag there, but we're not saying they're claiming the moon. Thank God we're developing outer space cooperation with the United States. Thank you. One more agency, Press Association, Clive Marshall, over to you.
Mr. President, relations between the UK and Russia have sunk to new lows as a result of the events in Ukraine. Last week, David Cameron said that Britain needed to prepare for a new and different relationship with Russia. He has supported sanctions, he's sent warplanes to the Baltic, and even last week, Prince Charles, the heir to the UK throne, reportedly compared you to Hitler. What are your responses to these comments?
It reminds me of a good proverb. You're angry, that means you're wrong. Give my words to Prince Charles. He's been to our country more than once. If indeed he made such a comparison, it is unacceptable. And I'm sure he understands that as a man of manners. I met him personally, as well as other members of the royal family. This is not what monarchs do. But over the past few years, we've seen so much. Nothing surprises me any longer. And I will be guided not but by what they say about me anyway. I will only be guided by the interests of the Russian people. And I hope that our colleagues in Great Britain will keep that in mind and will always remember that when finding solutions to any issues, we're always guided by international law and its norms. So only if we interpret them in a similar fashion, only if we respect international law will we be able to find solution to the most difficult issues. And should our British partners be guided by their national interests, like I do, and not by other reasons, I'm sure this will soon become a thing of the past and we'll be able to continue cooperation, good cooperation like back in the days, or maybe even reach some new heights and could start thinking about what is to be done in the future in order to make our cooperation more efficient.
Владимир Владимирович, мы выполнили программу минимум, то есть мы обещали всем нашим коллегам.
We promised.
Поэтому мы можем попросить камеры.
Now we probably should start our dinner. We'll switch off cameras and